Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're diving into the film Miller's Girl. It's about a teacher who can't seem to stay away from a beautiful young student. Let's not waste any time and jump right into the story explanation. The film begins with Cairo, a girl whose parents live abroad. She's living alone in an isolated house where writing has become her passion. While wandering through the woods, Cairo ends up in a classroom where she meets Jonathan Miller. Jonathan is a middle-aged man who, unable to succeed as a writer, became a teacher. When Cairo enters his class, Jonathan assigns her some books to read from the syllabus. However, Cairo reveals that she's already read all of them. Then another girl named Winnie enters the scene. Winnie is not only a classmate of Cairo's but also her close friend. The two of them head out to grab a bite to eat. While there, Jonathan notices an adult book among Cairo's belongings. Jonathan's friend Boris shows up to grab his coffee. He picks up the book, and both of them are surprised to see it's one of Jonathan's own works. Later that night, Jonathan's wife, Beatrice, is preoccupied. Seeking her attention, Jonathan mentions that one of his students was reading his book in class. This leads to a call from her friend Amy. After the call, Jonathan and Beatrice have drinks together, and as they grow closer, Beatrice gets another call. Frustrated, Jonathan vents to Boris the next day. Boris, of course, teases him about it. Soon after, they spot Cairo walking out of the woods and Jonathan begins to watch her more closely, clearly intrigued. He asks her if she ever feels scared walking through the woods, to which Cairo responds, "I am the scariest thing in those woods." Jonathan laughs at her boldness. In class, Winnie intentionally drops her books, which Boris notices, teasing her about it. Cairo, observing the exchange, calls them both crazy. The two of them later head to Cairo's place. Cairo is troubled by a college admission question asking her to list the biggest achievement of her life. After some back and forth, she realizes that nothing stands out. That's when Winnie suggests, "Why not write about an affair with your teacher?" Cairo is skeptical, noting Jonathan is 20 years older than her, but Winnie insists it would be the perfect subject, and that Jonathan is a good, decent man, perfect for Cairo's first experience. Winnie continues to talk about how Jonathan views Cairo in class. Cairo becomes shy, but also more intrigued by Jonathan. The next day, she starts gazing at him during class, and Jonathan notices. Afterward, Jonathan asks Cairo to meet him after class. Once class is over, Jonathan invites Boris to dinner, but Boris leaves after some playful dance moves. Jonathan tries to mimic the moves before Cairo arrives. The two of them laugh it off. Jonathan is impressed by a paragraph Cairo wrote, recalling it word for word. Cairo notices his attention, which pleases her. Jonathan then encourages her to write a short story in the style of her favorite author, promising her full marks if she does. Cairo agrees and reveals that she's read Jonathan's book as well, reciting parts of it just as Jonathan did. Jonathan is again impressed. He invites her to meet him on the weekend to discuss her assignment. At dinner that night, Jonathan and Beatrice talk, but their conversation is interrupted when they spot Winnie taking their order. Beatrice asks Jonathan if she's the same girl he mentioned, but Jonathan denies it. It's clear, though, that Beatrice is jealous of his growing interest in Cairo. Later, she insults him, saying he's no longer a real writer, just a regular teacher. On the weekend, Cairo meets Jonathan at the place he mentioned. Jonathan follows her, and they sit next to each other as a man recites a poem. Jonathan listens intently while Cairo gazes at him. After the poem, Cairo steps outside for a cigarette, and Jonathan joins her, sharing the cigarette. The next day, Cairo shows up to class wearing a revealing outfit. When Boris asks about it, Cairo brushes it off. Afterward, she approaches Jonathan, and their closeness grows. Just as Jonathan gets a message from his wife, Cairo talks to him about her favorite author and the short story she plans to write in their style. Jonathan, in a rush, quickly agrees and leaves to go home. Meanwhile, Winnie teases Boris, even hiding his phone in her clothes, but Cairo is distracted and can't find her own phone. Jonathan's plans to go out with his wife are cancelled when she gets busy with work. Soon, Jonathan realizes he accidentally took Cairo's phone with him, so he heads over to return it. When he arrives at her house, it's raining. Cairo answers in a thin dress, and they share a meaningful, lingering look. Then they kiss. That night, Jonathan returns home and finds an email from Cairo. His wife complains that she can't get any work done with him around, so Jonathan leaves to a small cabin. There, he prints out the story Cairo sent him and begins reading. The story turns out to be adult-themed, with a teacher-student relationship like his and Cairo's. This excites Jonathan, and in a moment of frustration, he undresses. But things change the next day when Jonathan no longer calls Cairo the way he used to. When Cairo asks him what happened, Jonathan claims he didn't like her story and points out many errors. Cairo, sensing the tension, accuses him of being afraid of the truth she wrote, something he couldn't bring himself to do. Furious, she challenges him, calling him a common writer and daring him to fail her. She storms off to her house, crying. Cairo spends the night drinking with Winnie. Meanwhile, Jonathan is clearly troubled. Beatrice questions him about his day, and Jonathan explains the situation with Cairo's story. But Beatrice, despite her own excitement about the story, is also annoyed by the disruption. Just then, Boris arrives, and the frustration mounts. Cairo and Winnie talk, and Cairo admits that Jonathan was just pretending to be close to her. She decides to take matters into her own hands and sends a provocative message to Boris. To grab his attention, Cairo and Winnie strip down and send him revealing photos. Boris, shocked, rushes out of Jonathan's house, leaving Jonathan more confused than ever. Soon, Jonathan's wife gets a call from the school where rumors of Jonathan's affair with Cairo have already spread. She's stunned. After confronting Jonathan, she demands to know if anything happened between him and Cairo. Jonathan insists it didn't, but his wife isn't convinced. They argue, and eventually, she decides to divorce him. The next day, Cairo isn't in class. She's in the vice principal's office, explaining everything, how Jonathan gave her the assignment in advance, how they smoked together, and how they met outside of school. When Jonathan is questioned, he stumbles, and the vice principal immediately figures out what happened. As a result, Jonathan is suspended from his job. Boris later speaks to Jonathan, telling him he should have known his boundaries. Now, because of his actions, everything has unraveled. When Jonathan returns home, he tells Beatrice that he's been fired. Beatrice becomes suspicious and asks if he has feelings for Cairo. Jonathan refuses to acknowledge it, but their argument escalates to the point where Beatrice is ready to divorce him. Meanwhile, Cairo remains indifferent. She tells Winnie that she doesn't care about the consequences of her actions. "Jonathan underestimated me," she says, "but now he'll see who I really am." Cairo reflects on her greatest achievement, which in the end is ruining Jonathan's career and personal life. She concludes by asking, now that Jonathan has lost his job and his wife, will he ever be able to write again? And with that, the movie comes to an end. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. Peace.